Here are the notes for lesson 3-2. Make sure that you grab the student copy from Google Classroom. There's 8 slides. We should be able to go through them pretty quickly. I'm going to present from PowerPoint just to keep the slides consistent. Our first title slide just shows you a graphic of the journal. This is a 5-column journal. It contains 2 general columns, a general debit and a general credit, and 3 special columns, a sales credit, a cash debit, and a cash credit. This is a typical accounting form. I'll have a Google sheet that we'll use for all of the activities, but this is the example graphic that you'll see on every slide. On slide 2, I just wanted to review 4 steps that you need to kind of go through every time you journalize a transaction. We're going to journalize all of the transactions in Chapter 3 that we've been analyzing, but now to journalize them means to not only break them up into debit and credit parts, but to actually write them into an accounting form called a journal. So the first step is to write the date. The second step is to write the debit amount. The third step is to write the credit amount. The fourth step is to write the source document. And every source document has a unique number, so that will be included on our journal. On slide 3, we look at the first transaction that we've ever learned. It's the same transaction from Chapter 1. It's received cash from the owner as an investment for $5,000. We used receipt number 1 to show proof that this actually happened. I always like to analyze my transactions into T accounts first. It helps me see what's happening. I know that anytime I receive cash, I have a cash debit because I have more cash, and I have a capital credit because I have more worth in the business as the owner. To put this in a journal, I need to have my journal in front of me. I'm going to use a Google Sheet when we do these examples in class, but the first step is to write the date. The very first transaction in any journal on the top line always gets the year, the month, and the day. We'll always use the current year. The month can be abbreviated if you need to, but the day of the month will go next to it. Step 2 is to then write the amount that's debited, and in this case, it's cash. Since cash has its own column, I can come over to the cash debit column and write in $5,000. These graphics all show the dollar amounts just without decimal places and without dollar signs. When we format our spreadsheets, they will be formatted as accounting, which shows a dollar sign and decimals with 2 decimal places, but that should happen automatically. On step 3, we would record the general credit. Since capital does not have its own special column, it needs to use a general credit. And whenever I use a general column, either debit or credit, I need to use the account title to specify which account is getting that general debit or credit, in this case, credit. Step 4 is to write in the document number, and we're using receipt number 1. We abbreviate all of our document numbers. So receipts are abbreviated with an R, and since it's the first one, it tells us in the transaction above that we're using receipt number 1. I record it. I know my journal entry is complete. In Chapter 4, we'll talk more about the post-reference column. Don't worry about it so much now. Just make sure that the document number is filled in. On slide 4, we have the next transaction that's typical when you're starting a business, which is paying cash for supplies. We use check number 1 because anytime we pay cash, we use a check. We'll go ahead and we'll write our T account analysis to show us that supplies gets a debit increase, cash gets a credit decrease. My transaction is in balance because I have 1 debit and 1 credit. My first step is to write the date in the date column. Since it's the second transaction of August, I don't need to write August again. I can just write on number 3 for August 3rd. Only the first transaction gets the year and the month. The rest of them get just the day of the month. If I have 2 transactions on one day, I do need to write the day again. So if I have another August 3rd transaction below this, I would write 3 again. Step 2 is to record the general debit amount. And since it was to supplies does not have a special column. I need to go ahead and put it in the general debit columns. Step 3 is to write the credit amount. Since it was to cash does have a special column, so I get to put it into the cash credit column. The last step is to write in my source document number. It's check, so I abbreviate it with a C, and it's check number 1. On slide 5, we see the next transaction that we've learned, which is paid cash for insurance. This one happens on August 4th. I'm using the next check in the sequence, which is check number 2. I write my T accounts just to give me a little analysis, knowing that anytime I see paid cash, I know I have a cash credit. Could stop thinking at that point and just debit prepaid insurance, or I could go a step further and know that anytime I increase my asset, it gets debited. First step is to write the date. In this case, I just need to write the number 4 because it's August 4th. August has already been written on the first line. Step 2 is to write the debit amount, and in this case, it was prepaid insurance. Does not have its own special column, so I'll use the general debit. Therefore, I need to write prepaid insurance in the account title. Step 3 is to write the credit amount. It's a cash credit, so I get to use the cash credit column. And step 4 is to write the source document number. In this case, it was check number 2. On slide 6, our next transaction is a little bit different because this time when I buy supplies on account, the two accounts that I'm dealing with are supplies and accounts payable. So when I look at my T accounts, I know that they're both accounts that do not have a special column. So my debit to supplies of $500 needs to be in the general debit column, and my credit to accounts payable needs to be in the general credit column. Because of that, I need to use 2 lines for this entry. So take a special note to just kind of look at, I've only written the date once, and I've only written the source document once, and I've done that on purpose. It's generally accepted accounting practice so that I have one date to signify that these 2 rows go together, one source document to signify that this transaction is one transaction. So step 1 is to write the date on the first line, which is the 7th. Step 2 is to write the debit amount. It's a general debit to supplies, so I write the debit amount of $500 and the account title, supplies. Step 3 is to write the credit amount. We like to put our debits first. Step 3 is to write $500 in the general credit and accounts payable supply depot in the account title. And then step 4 is to write the source document. Again, I only need to write the source document on the first line of the entry. Slide 7 is our last transaction, which is paying cash on account. Again, quick look at the T accounts tells me that whenever I pay cash, I have less cash, so I cash credit. Therefore, accounts payable must be my debit. Step 1 is to write the date. It happened on August 11th. Step 2 is to write the general debit amount. So it's accounts payable in the account title, general debit in the general debit column. And step 3 is to write the cash credit in the cash credit column of the same amount, $300. Step 4 is to write the source document in the source document number. It's our next available check. It told us up in the entry to use check number 3. On slide 8 are the vocabulary words. These are for both section 3-1 and 3-2. There might be a few more in the rest of the chapter, but for now, these are the ones that you should be focusing on. I'll probably have a chapter 3 Quizlet at some point up on Google Classroom that you can practice with. So save your notes. We'll do some problems in class to practice actually journalizing.